Yeah, and that's like with the alignment of incentives, right? Your factory's incentives are completely different from your incentives. So again, if you delay the problem, like, hey, like, I'll figure this out later. If you
Mhm.
can't control what you can't measure. So if you're not measuring it, there's no guarantee that it will stay even at this defect rate in 2 months, because your factory is like, hey, customers still buying the products, no complaints or a couple
Mhm.
complaints. Let's keep it this way, or let's maybe
Right.
drop this raw material a little bit, and then your defects can accelerate, and you can't control it, because if you don't
Right.
measure it, you can't control it, and the longer you delay it, the more problems you have. So if you have quality control problems like defects and ODR issues, like that has to be solved right away. And we've
Mhm.
talked with like financing companies, that do like inventory financing,
Mhm.
working capital financing for Amazon brands, and they literally just disqualify you if your ODRs are too high. They're just like done. So like you need customizability and you need
Mhm.
control. And that's what's really key. So you need to customize for your product and the defects you're having and things like that. And then you need control over it. And if you're working with like, 5, 6 different inspection companies, you're rotating, every inspection company has a different process, a different
Mhm.
reporting standard, different booking standard. There's just no consistency between that data. And there's no way to analyze that. So the first step is to literally just, stick with one provider, and, stick with
Mhm.
the provider that you want to work with, like long term. So, whether that's Movley, it's a different provider, that's fine, but you need to stick with one provider, and you need to make sure they know what they're doing and they give you that
Yeah.
customizability. So that's the first step, figure
Mhm.
that out, stick with one place, because you can't diagnose a problem from 5 different people, working on the same problem. It's not gonna,
For
no
sure.
one, no one has enough data to actually fix that.
Like you've put all of these theories into practice.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And we do inspections from all the way from like small clients, that are just starting out, all the way down to huge aggregators, huge brand conglomerates, worth billions of dollars. So it's a pretty
Mhm.
wide spectrum of clients. But what we've done is we've taken all that insight, all that knowledge, we're working with the biggest clients and getting their insights of how they run manufacturing, how they run production, all of our insights that we've collected across all of our clients, small,
Mhm.
large, how they run, how they work, what we've seen work really well, what we've seen work not really well. And we basically added all this into a ebook. And this ebook kind of goes through like our inspection philosophy of how we recommend doing inspections,
Mhm.
how we recommend setting it up, how we recommend using it, and how to like things like asking those questions to your suppliers, things like that. So that's basically what this ebook goes through, is like our philosophy, how to look at sample sizes, how to, if you're an e-commerce seller, if you're a marketplace seller, if you're a brick and mortar seller. And it's really customized, and it's really detailed, and it dives pretty deep into like how we work. And that's
Mhm.
essentially what the ebook we put together is our entire inspection philosophy. So when you work with us, you work with whoever, you understand like the type of philosophy that you should be working with, and how to properly set up your inspections to actually make them effective. Basically what that is that what I learned in that process is that inspections, you need control and customizability, like having your own team on the ground and being able to control the process, see into the process, customize it, because every brand is different, every product is different. But also at the same time, when it comes down to running a business and doing that, you have to be accountable for fraud, for bribery, for all these different things. So you also need the control, the scale, the data, the audits of a much larger third party that can work within that customizations that you're looking for, and that process you're looking for, to be able to accomplish that as best as possible. Yeah, no, that's definitely very true. And there's kind of like 2 points of training. Like,
Mhm.
first of all, for the inspector, and then first of all, and second of all, for like the client, right? You have
Yeah.
to take things from like a quality first point of view. And on the inspector side, like bad training is like a flip of a switch. So, like,
Mhm.
for example, an inspector goes to the factory, like, an inspection is 50% setup and 50% execution. So the
Mhm.
setup part is training for clients and how they set it up, and the execution part is training for the inspectors. If
Right.
either of those are amiss, the inspection results are ineffective. It doesn't matter. So that's where it becomes really important. So on the execution side with inspectors, right? Like if an inspector goes to your factory and the factory's like, hey, here's your box of products to inspect. And the inspector's like, oh, thank you. And they inspect that and they find no problems. And you can still end up with a 80% defect rate because they just
Right.
gave you a box of good products. And so, inspector has to know like, okay, I need to go search randomly. I need to go through all these cartons. I need to do
Oh
this.
yeah.
And,
Random product polls, right?
exactly. And that's huge. And on the setup side, training is very important as well for like, clients and stuff. And that's what our service pods do and they help with. Regardless of product, it's a product by product thing and it's an ongoing thing. It changes every time you do an inspection. But you want to make sure you understand the process of how to inspect the product and you have it very clear and illustrated. Like, for example, if you're using a machine, you need to say, okay, hey, we're going to use this machine. We're going to put it under X pressure, whatever, and we're going to do this test and, run the product. Because when the inspector goes and does that test, they're not going to be able to, inspectors are not engineers, right? So they're not going to be able to sit and engineer your entire test for you, but they're going to go do this test for you. And, or they're going to have a factory rep do this test. They're going to take a video, they're going to take photos, they're going to record all the results, and they're going to send that to you. And that's where you need to be able to see these results and say, okay, hey, this is good or this is bad. So that's very important for you to know. So there's the training aspect on the customer side, and there's a training aspect on the inspector side. And both of them are vital. Okay, I can't trust these inspection companies. And what I learned is that the core process with inspections was just systematically broken because first of all, inspection companies do not actually know how much time it takes to inspect the product. And they don't actually calculate that time for inspectors, based on how many units you want to test, what you want tested, things like that. And also inspection companies are very standardized. So they're just like, hey, send an inspector off to the factory. You're going to go check a product. Most inspection companies all follow this process where they will visually inspect, maybe 100, 200 units, whatever, but they will functionally check one unit. First of all, having somebody to translate on the ground can really be helpful. And I always like to look at it from a relationship point of view, right? So you want to build relationships with your factories, with your suppliers. So like a lot of people just go on Alibaba, they're like, hey, I want to buy 1,000 units, maybe a couple, more units in the future. What's your price? And these are my specs. Versus like, a relationship-based approach would be like going up to that guy, being on the call with the person and also having maybe a translator there if necessary and walking them through a presentation. Hey, this is my company. This is what we do. This is why we started. This is my origin story. And this is what we're looking for as far as a partner. We're looking for somebody to partner with in long term. We're starting with this, but we'll build into this and we're looking for somebody to build it with kind of thing. Right. And that has a completely different approach. So that's number one. Number two is
communication, better communication that's prepared in detail in advance, right? As opposed to just winging it.
Exactly. You really have to think about it as like a process. And then the second thing is like taking that into account and understanding that you really need to vet your suppliers and you really need to vet, what they're doing. So like one of my favorite questions is like, quality control should be a central point of your buying decision. Because like if you work with a factory and they don't have good quality control processes internally, if you ask them very deep level quality control questions and they're not able to answer them, then let's say for example, you have a product and every product, whether it's a wooden shelf or it's something very basic like a pasta strainer, all the way down to a very complex product like some electronic products, there's product tests for all of them and there's machines for that. Like say for example, you have like a pasta strainer, right? You have an aluminum coating or whatever metal coating, you want to make sure that product is going to last. Maybe you put it in like a salt spray machine, which sprays it with salt and water and, sees, okay, can it hold up to all the abuse and all the thing, if you're using it for a pasta, it's like accelerated wear. That's a machine. So if you have a good factory that you work with and they have that machine and they're like, yeah, we take 1 out of every 100 units that we produce and we put it in this machine and we make sure it works. First of all, that's going to drive your price higher because that's more work. You're maybe wasting some units in the process. So lower price doesn't necessarily mean, higher quality or,
right.
But let's say they do that and put that into the machine every 1 out of 100 and it works out and they use that as a spot check. Another factory that doesn't have that machine, they're not going to be able to do any of that. So if they don't have any machines, they don't have any testing processes, there's no way they can make consistent quality products, regardless if it's a high quality or a low quality product, because they have no way to actually measure what consistency looks like. Quality control is an iterative process, right? And that's the unfortunate and also fortunate truth about it. Fortunate in the sense that on a positive manner, you can continually improve your quality over time and get it down. But it also means like, the first order you do or the first time you start having quality control problems, if you have no consistency, like what we had, like working with my own brand with my own team, where every time we did an inspection we would get different results. There's no consistency.
Right, inconsistency.
Yeah, and you have no data to actually analyze to start improving your quality control, and you have to start collecting that data. And that's where it becomes a little bit unfortunate, because if you're actively having quality control problems and you don't start your quality control processes in advance to having quality control problems, it's going to take you a little bit of time to fix that. You can't just, hey, I'm going to do a QC inspection, my problems are solved. You have to first start off and like say, okay, hey, these are my problems, these are issues I'm having, and these are how to test for that. So the way that we handle it internally is that when clients start having those problems, we put them through our standard onboarding process. So we send them over a product questionnaire, and the product questionnaire asks them like tons of questions on their products, how they should be tested, what to look for, what problems they have, what problems they've had in the past, things like that. And we collect all that information. Our service pods digest that. Like, does this make sense? Did they have questions about it? And then what we do is we have a database internally. And this is one of the things that makes Movley really unique, is we aggregate data across all of our clients. And our service pod is essentially your tunnel to be able to access that data. So they will.
So you have category specific knowledge. You've worked with brands who have similar products in that category, maybe even a competitive product in that category, right? So you already have some institutional knowledge that you can bring to the table.
We have like a bunch of questions you can ask your supplier. Like, what kind of quality control processes do you follow? Do you have machines for your quality control processes? Things like that. If you have a translator, a lot of people want to use a translator and they're like, hey, I don't trust the translator and stuff like that. You don't have to put them in a position where you have to trust them. You're just asking them questions and they're giving you answers. There's no benefit for them.
Right.
They're not taking commission or anything. So you already found the supplier, you just have a translator jump in on the second call or something like that and just ask really technical questions. So that's like a good way of doing it. But asking, when you're talking with 10 different suppliers, all 10 of these suppliers, these specific set of questions, you can get a really good idea remotely, like, hey, this is how the product's produced, this is how the product's QC is done, and things like that. And you're asking it at the stage of like, hey, the supplier wants to sell you for the business, for your business. They see you're a big brand, you built a relationship, you gave them a presentation.
Audition time, right?
Exactly. And now they want to get you to work for them. So that's when, you start asking all these questions and they're going to give you the best answers possible. And then you can pick and choose like, hey, this factory knows what they're doing. This factory knows what they're doing here. Let me pick and choose all these parts in the manufacturing process. And you don't have to be an engineer to figure it out. Like, oh, I like this. I like this. I like this. This looks at the right things. And then you can create your own quality control plan. And then you can go to the supplier that you like the most and say, follow this plan, one. And then once you have that plan, you can give that to like Movley, you can give that to, your inspector, and then you can make sure that, hey, in the production process, this plan is being followed. They're executing this. After production, those same tests that you do in the production process, you can do it on randomly selected units in the final shipment. So you can make sure that is done properly, and you can do these tests, render them properly. And the inspectors can do that at the factory lab. So there's an ecosystem part to it, but every product is also so unique. And that's where service pod comes in. They can take a look at the other information, put that together and basically put together like a process for you. And then you have to work with them to set up sample sizes, what your risk tolerance is for different tests, for different areas, your risk tolerances for visual defects. And then once you put that all together, then you can put together like a whole custom process for the inspection. And that's where you start. So if you're starting to have quality control problems, things like that, I always recommend, start there. First of all, get a good process in place. But also take a couple of steps back before you even do that and just, go through the sales process like we talked about with different suppliers. Start talking with a couple of new suppliers, opening conversations, asking them these questions, starting to build a quality control plan, and then start asking your supplier about those specific questions. Incorporate that into your quality control inspection plan. It has to be a holistic approach. So if you're actively having those problems, you kind of have to tackle it at like all those steps at once because you didn't do it earlier. Now you have to do it all now.
Yeah, and of course, with these days with the inventory limits, with what they're doing in FBA, if you have to hit the brakes and you're going 90 miles an hour, it's going to take you some time to stop and some time to make some changes, right? And to put those improvements into place. Otherwise, you're just saying, well, we're going to ride out the rest of the year and hope that these defects go away. But we've got a bunch of stuff that we've already ordered that are going in FBA. I mean, it becomes a problem if you're putting this stuff off, or not taking it seriously, or not being thorough and comprehensive in the problems you reviewed today. I mean, especially heading into Q4, you could be creating a nightmare for yourself. And of course, ASINs start going down. You could have an account suspension looming if you really put it off for a long time. That's the other, consequence of not taking it seriously and not getting your hands dirty or making the investment and jumping in there right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, to summarize it, it's basically just high stakes gambling. And you're doing it to save a couple of hours of time. And a couple of hours on the front end for figuring out how to do quality control, set up your processes. And then like an inspection, I mean, it's not that much. We're talking like a couple $100 an order.
Right.
You have a more, bigger order, more thorough, complex product, maybe a little bit more, a couple hundred, something like that. So, you're basically high stakes gambling for really nothing.
Or like, you're not pushing yourself enough. You're saying, well, we took a look at it. We can't figure it out. So we'll figure it out later. It's like, well, do the painful homework now to figure it out, because later there might not be a later, like I said.
Yeah. Especially
with
a
couple of listing takedowns, your risk score goes up. I mean, you mentioned risk score, and then Amazon's got their own internal risk score that portrays itself on your account health dashboard as at risk of suspension. Well, once that happens, you could get a call from account health any day saying, we need a plan of action. We need to hear what these improvements are. You need to know before you put an appeal together exactly what's going wrong. If they think you're just guessing, they don't look at your plan of action. They don't look at your appeal. They don't take you seriously.
What we've learned from our aggregator partners is like our aggregators and buyers, private equity, whoever it is, they will literally reduce your valuation if you've had quality control problems 3 years ago that have been solved. So if you had quality control problems, you had a huge ODR issue and your account got suspended or whatever, your listing got suppressed, or even your product reviews for one of your products went down, you had to relaunch the listing, or even your profits were just bad 1 month because you got a bad order. They look at that and they fine tooth it, with their little pens and combs, through your financials,
algorithms, software, everything, right?
Yeah, and they're building all the tech for it too now, and they like come up with a risk calculation score essentially. And if you had those kind of problems, your risk score goes up pretty considerably, even if it was 3 years ago. And then when your risk score goes up, your multiple goes down, even if the issue is there, because they're like, hey, this is a more complex product, we have more negotiation leverage, and it reduces your valuation across the board. So you might think, hey, I can cut corners on inspections today, but 3 years down the line, when you actually sell your business, it's going to bite you back in the face. So you have to always kind of think about it like a house, right? Like, of course, your house, if you buy a property, right, that property is worth, I'd say $500,000. It's generating $2K a month in cash flow. That's kind of cash flow per month, but that house is still worth $500K, and your business has a valuation of its own. So if you have a rental property, would you go and, if your kitchen needs a repair, would you just go and, leave it blank, or like, just like have a broken refrigerator that could possibly light the whole house on fire and void?
Right.
I'm saying, like, you don't want that there. And that's kind of the same thing with aggregators. And we do have partnerships with like some agencies, some aggregators and things like that do work with us. It's really interesting because a lot of times we work with the sellers and we also work with the aggregators. So like when aggregators, buy clients and they buy, their entire account, we just move it over to the aggregators. And a lot of times the aggregators, when they're onboarding, or there's sometimes when they're doing due diligence, it depends, aggregator to aggregator, but a lot of times they come to us and they're like, hey, here's everything on this company, here's everything on this product. Tell us if quality control is set up properly, we need to make changes. And then, we help them actually set up the quality control processes for those brands.